True democracy is not the White House. True democracy is not Canberra. True democracy is the resistance of people armed with the truth against lies from Tahrir to right here in London. Every day, ordinary people teach us that democracy is free speech and dissent.
That was Julian Assange in 2012 from the Ecuadorian embassy when he was where he was basically had been holed up trying to stay out of jail because the United States was after him and Britain was after him. All kinds of people were after him because they didn't like him talking. But now Julian Assange is free. And we have two guys who have been just pounding on this drum for many, many years to try to get this free speech. And we're delighted to have today Scott Horton and Matt Ho. And guys, welcome. And I've been wanting to have you guys on for this for a while. Back in, Matt, when we were both in London and you were talking at an event, I remember you were talking, saying, well, there's probably not much hope that he's going to get out. They're probably going to send him back to the United States and he's going to stay in jail or whatever. So in a certain sense, this is a real big surprise, but I think a welcome one.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I think that the big shock was back in May when the British courts said, yes, he could go forward with an appeal hearing. And that I think opened the door for this. It changed a lot of people's perception on it. Hope was provided to a lot of us, but the British courts, by saying, yes, there is the possibility of a hearing here for an appeal, that allowed this to happen, because I think that's what the American government, the Biden administration, looked at, was that we could lose this in the British courts. So let's get what we can out of it now.
And I just want to just kind of as a coda to that opening segments there, because that's a great speech. And I recommend people Google it to watch the whole thing that he said, because he said a lot of great stuff in there. But one of the things that just one of many things that just really has kind of aggravated me over the years is how this man was treated like an axe murderer or something worse than an axe murderer. Here he was in 2019 as he was roughly taken out of that Ecuadorian embassy. Gary, roll that.
No worries.
So Scott, let me start with you. So this has been going on for quite a long time, and a lot of people may hear the name Julian Assange, but they don't really know what was going on. So, and I know both of you have been very, very active over the years and really trying to elevate his cause and get him free. I wonder if you can kind of help us out a little bit of where did this all start?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Danny. And forgive me for doing this, but I think it's so important, just in case anyone in your audience doesn't know how important it is. I feel very honored to be here with the two of you. And, you know, speaking of a long time ago, it was a decade ago now, but Matthew Ho was the great whistleblower of 2009 who tried to stop Obama from doing the surge and tripling the Afghan war. And then Danny Davis was the great whistleblower of 2012 who said that the surge didn't work and that David Petraeus is a liar. And here's the truth of the Afghan war. We've already lost and we got to come home now, which they finally did 9 years later. And so I'm really in the presence of greatness here. You guys are two of the three greatest whistleblowers of the Afghan war. The third, of course, is Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, who leaked these documents to Julian Assange, including the Afghan war logs. So Assange himself was like a computer hacker type guy, or not hacker, but cyber activist type going way back. And he had created WikiLeaks, I think in like, I'm going to say 06 or 07.
Yeah.
And he was publishing, basically the deal was publishing raw documents, verified raw documents from any leaker in the world. And so he was publishing documents that at sometimes the American empire didn't seem to mind because they would be against his enemies, including the Russians. He had posted some documents from the Russians as well as from Somalia and wherever else, a few other places. But the big score came with Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning. This was, I believe, a specialist in the U.S. Army in Iraq War II. And Manning became a whistleblower because she was made to be a participant in torture. A guy was arrested for writing an article called "Where Did the Money Go?", which was about, of course, the corrupt American installed dictator, so-called Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, and his corruption. And this guy was being hauled off to the dungeon to be tortured, maybe to death or something. And Manning objected and said, I don't want to be part of this, and was told, get back to work. And that was the motivation, which was, explained and admitted candidly by Manning in private chats with someone he thought was his friend at the time, Adrian Lamo, the rat that turned him over to the FBI. But that was his motivation. And then what he did was he took secret level, and you guys are military, you can explain this better than me, but this is essentially confidential and secret level information on the SIPR net, which is a pretty wide distribution network inside the government and the military. It was not top secret stuff. So this is not like Aldrich Ames or Jonathan Pollard, who's like turning over data that is getting American spies rolled up and murdered on the other side of the lines out there in Russia or some kind of thing. It was nothing like that. They claimed this huge propaganda campaign claimed that Manning and Assange had blood on their hands. They would say over and over again, blood on their hands, the way they always do. They come up with some like focus group tested slogan, but they could never prove, and it wasn't true. And that was why they could never prove it. It was never true that anyone was hurt or killed, even though eventually, and it wasn't even their fault, some informants' names were published. Informants in Afghanistan's names were published, but they were never, murdered by the Taliban over it anyway. So that whole thing was a red herring. But here's the key, okay? It was the Iraq and Afghan war logs and the State Department cables, as well as the Guantanamo files. And those war logs, and especially those State Department cables, back when Google still worked, I don't know if anybody ever invents a search engine that works ever again in the future, you'll be able to find there are really, no kidding, there are probably 10,000 news stories from around the world that are either based on these documents or at least cite these documents in part. And you will notice and you will see based on the WikiLeaks or based on State Department cables reveal, and you'll see at least a paragraph in a story referring back to something that we know was true from back in 2007 or whatever, because it's in the State Department documents. I'm working on a massive book about our new Cold War with Russia right now, and I rely very heavily on the WikiLeaks to show the French and the Germans and everyone warning Bush not to do it when he invited Ukraine to join NATO back in 2008 and all of these different things. It's all in there. And in fact, later on, I actually have Manning and Assange's greatest hits from that big leak for later in the discussion if you want. I have a lot more great examples. But the point is that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and in cooperation with Manning, receiving Manning's leak. Manning was the government employee here. Julian Assange was the leakee and the publisher. But this is God's gift to journalism. This is the greatest thing that happened to journalism in the 21st century so far. Bigger and better than Snowden because it's much broader in terms of the amount of information from around the world and all of the different important things there. And so all of the scaremongering stuff about it wasn't true. What was true was pure heroism. This was like every single thing in there was stuff that we deserved to know, that we had the right to know, things that our government was doing wrong and keeping from us.
And Matt, let me ask you, what is, from your perspective, what was the biggest bombshell from the Manning WikiLeaks disclosures that caused our government to be so angry and want to get him shut up?
Oh gosh, I mean, there are so many. It's interesting what you said about when Google still worked. About a half hour ago, I checked both my Google and my Apple News feed, and nothing. Scrolling, right? Nothing on there at all on either feeds about Julian Assange. So not even 24 hours since the announcement of this deal. He hasn't even gone in front of the judge yet in Saipan Google and Apple news feeds have erased them. The biggest, what gets it to the point where the Trump administration comes after him. So in 2012, June of 2012, Julian Assange goes into the Ecuadorian embassy, essentially into their protective custody, because he is very rightly afraid that the Americans are going to seek to extradite him for the releases that Scott was describing, the Iraq and Afghan war logs, the State Department cables, as well as the Guantanamo Bay cables, all things that exposed the very real crimes of the American government, as well as things that were incredibly embarrassing, right? Things that we were involved with other nations, whether it was, say, the coup in Honduras, whether it was like training police in Egypt how to torture. I mean, on and on. The list of what WikiLeaks exposed about the American government and what it was doing around the world. I mean, we could just sit here and read these things off for an hour. But what gets it to the point where the American government decides, enough, we are going to bring him here, and the Brits go along with it, of course, is when WikiLeaks releases the Vault 7 files. And the Vault 7 files are, I believe it was 2017, those releases occurred. The Vault 7 files were the releases regarding CIA espionage, particularly online computer surveillance type espionage. This was the releases that told the world that the CIA has the ability to turn your television set on and record you. They have the ability to eavesdrop through almost any type of device out there, as well as a host of other aspects of how the CIA was operating, particularly in a technical capacity, digitally, through the internet, online, however you want to describe it. And that really set off the Trump administration. That infuriated the CIA, that infuriated Mike Pompeo, who was the head of CIA at the time. And that's when we see the Americans really start to push the Brits towards extraditing Julian Assange. Up until that point, he has been in captivity, essentially, through the protective custody of the Ecuadorian embassy, but he hadn't been remanded, taken out of the embassy, and brought to Belmarsh prison, where he spent the last 5 years. And extradition proceedings hadn't officially begun. So it's him, it's Julian and WikiLeaks exposing what were called the crown jewels of the CIA that get to this point. And things that we should know about. So similarly to like what Ed Snowden shows us in Ed's revelations of 2013, what Ed shows us in 2013 about how we live in a surveillance state. And that's not hyperbole. They have the ability to watch everything we do, to record everything we do. Everything we do, they capture. It is far beyond anything Orwell contemplated or wrote about. This is far beyond anything the East German state, the Stasi, could have ever fantasized about. This is the reality of the surveillance state, the way the American government spies, not on the world, but on its own people. And so that Vault 7 release is what really pushes the American government to the point that we are going to get our pound of flesh now.
Yeah. By the way,
Scott, let me ask you.
Let me just interject there real quick. That he's absolutely right that was the final straw where they said, that's it, we're getting this guy as far as the vengeance goes. However, in the meantime, he released the DNC documents. Emails that cost Hillary Clinton the election of 2016, which they blamed on Russia, which is, of course, a complete hoax. And people should know this because I'm sure they heard it a million times. But you can look in the Mueller report. He doesn't even attempt to connect the chain of custody from Russia to WikiLeaks. There isn't one. It's a total lie. And but
so I'm sorry, give me a little bit more about what was the gist of this DNC issue?
Okay, so in the summer of 2016, WikiLeaks posted a leak from the DNC, the DCCC, and the Podesta emails, the Podesta account, which was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. That came out later. And they had all kinds of evidence in there. For example, them rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders. And, all kinds of scandalous stuff like that. The head of the DNC actually had to resign over it and this kind of thing. And hilariously, people should Google this if they've never heard of it. The Podesta emails revealed the Pied Piper strategy. Get our friends in the media to support Donald Trump because he'll be easier to beat in the fall. Ha ha ha. Cheaters never win.
Oh, man.
But all this really hurt, and it was one of the things that they really wanted revenge for. So I don't mean to contradict what Matt said there, because I believe he's right that it was Vault 7 was when they said, all right, enough is enough of this. It's time to move on him and solve this one way or the other, that kind of thing.
Right, because at that point, it's
really
Trump administration.
Off, boy, yeah. I tell you,
Yeah, I mean, because what you have is you have the Democrats absolutely furious at WikiLeaks, furious at Julian Assange, but the Trump administration comes into power, and you've got Trump essentially saying WikiLeaks is great. WikiLeaks is terrific. WikiLeaks upsets Trump the day of his election because WikiLeaks puts out a big thing the day of Trump's inauguration. I'm sorry, saying, "Hey, anyone who's got access to Trump's tax records, give us a call," essentially. So they immediately alienate the new president on the first day he's there, right? So that doesn't, but then exactly. So you have both, what eventually happens, you have both political parties as well as the security state furious, and they want their vengeance. They want this punishment. And they also, very importantly, they want to set an example. This is what so much of this is about putting Julian's head on a pike as a warning to others, not to embarrass us, not to humiliate us, not to expose us. Stay within your lane. Stay to your narrative. This goes a step beyond the access journalism, the carrot and stick journalism that the American government uses to keep, particularly corporate media in line. This goes that step into, okay, what are we going to do about these independent journalists? What are we going to do about this alternative media that all this technology is allowing to populate around the world? How are we going to keep that in line? Because our carrot and stick, these people don't care. Scott Horton doesn't care about getting invited onto Air Force One. Danny Davis doesn't care if he's gotten the White House Christmas card list. How are we going to keep this independent media in line? Well, we'll throw them in Belmarsh, or we'll throw them, wherever for 5 years and see how they like that. So that's what so much is about.
So let me ask you something. So in the Snowden revelations that came out, there was a number of things, and I can't remember the details. Maybe y'all can freshen my memory here, but I want to say it was the National Security Advisor who just flatly declared on national television that we weren't spying on Americans, we weren't doing any of that stuff, and then Snowden exposed that we were. So just flat out in your face lying illegally. And of course, what always jumped to me was, okay, if Snowden did some stuff with his disclosures that broke, the laws that he signed, maybe he does need to be held accountable for that. But let's hold the guys who were lying above that accountable for what they had. But I never saw anyone held account at all in anything Snowden has. Is there anything similar in the things that Julian Assange released that exposed some egregious illegal activity that no one was held account for?
Sure. Yes, a lot. Wait, first, James Clapper is the guy who, when he was
that's right. Yeah, Clapper.
Yeah, when he was the deputy director of the DIA, he helped plan Operation Storm, the great atrocity in Croatia in 1995. And then he was the guy who lied and said that everything with a roof in Iraq had a weapons of mass destruction factory or warehouse beneath it when he was the head of, it's not the National Reconnaissance Office, it's the one with the fancier military name than that, but the spy satellite group there. And then he was the one who lied that Vladimir Putin helped Saddam move all his chemical weapons to Syria, which is why we couldn't find him. And because he was never held accountable for his atrocity in Croatia, and he was never held accountable for lying us into war with Iraq, he was then promoted so that he was in the position to perjure himself in sworn testimony before Congress and deny all the spying that, of course, he was guilty of, himself was in charge of, not just aware of. And then, of course, was the same guy who helped to perpetrate the massive Russiagate hoax on the United States, pretending that the Russians had any intervention whatsoever to do with the election of Donald Trump in 2016. Same guy. And then, wait, as far as crimes in there, how about torturing people to death and specifically putting Iran's best friends from the Badr Brigade in power in Iraq, and David Petraeus, the great American fraud, turning them, building them into the Iraqi army, and using their still private adjuncts to essentially act as death squads, going around rounding up and murdering not the leaders of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but whatever Sunni enemies they had set their sights on. And then what they would do is they'd take them into the basement and they would torture them to death with power drills. And for anybody who saw this is Clint Eastwood, who I'm a big fan of, but he did this horrible movie, American Sniper, about this guy, Chris Kyle, where they tried to venerate him and make him some hero for sniping civilians resisting the invasion of their country. And in that movie, the bad guys are torturing people with power drills, and the hero, Chris Kyle, comes and saves them. But that's not the real history of that war. The real history of that war was that David Petraeus had put Colonel Steele and Colonel what's-his-name in charge of working with this Bada Brigade, and they were the ones torturing people to death with power drills, the American allies in that war. And the documents reveal that there was something called the Fragmentary Order 242, Frago 242, that said that if you know about Iraqis torturing people, don't do anything about it. Turn the other way and don't turn them in unless, just you don't participate in it yourself, which was absolutely illegal. And in fact, at one point, Rumsfeld tried to justify this and had been interrupted during a live press conference by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Peter Pace, who told him, no, Mr. Secretary, that is not right. If our allies are committing war crimes, we have an obligation to intervene and stop them. And that was the truth and the law, but they broke it anyway.
Wow.
I mean, I think so much what you see in these documents is just the reckless nature of the American empire, the executive branch, the American military, how it just thumbed its nose, just ignored, just pissed all over anything it wanted to. So whether it's like what Scott was talking about, where James Clapper goes in front of the Congress and perjures himself, or Gary put up something about John Brennan, the former head of the CIA under Barack Obama, who has a history similar to Clapper's, full of just mendacious failures one after another, sinister, mendacious, nefarious failures one after another. You can go down the whole line to all the generals that went in front of Congress and said, we're winning this war, or we're following international law, or we're following the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or on and on and on, the list of what they said that wasn't true, that was then shown to be the case by WikiLeaks. It's just massive. It's massive. I mean, whether it's the fact that the Obama administration was secretly bombing Yemen, I mean, that's something that comes to light in all of this. The fact that we knew that the Pakistani intelligence service, the Pakistani military, were actively helping the Afghan Taliban. So the people that were killing our troops were getting support from the people that we were giving hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to. And we knew all this. The fact that we knew that the Saudis were the greatest supporters of terrorism in the world, not the Iranians or any of that, or the Venezuelans or the Cubans or whoever, but the Saudis. I mean, so on and on. So it goes beyond just like what the technical breaking of law was to this greater mendacity, this greater cynicism, these failures that were just promoted and propelled on lies one after another, and all being done to pursue some ridiculous agenda of the American empire that was only every year making things worse and worse. So I think that's when you take a step back and you look at what WikiLeaks shows. It's in that entirety, in the enormity of it all. You really see it, because it's so easy to get lost, for they lose the forest for sight of the trees here. Because there are so many unique and crazy and incredible details that WikiLeaks exposed. And again, so many that you get overwhelmed that you can't even begin to talk about them because you're afraid you're going to forget about something else. But I mean, it's just like my favorite one. And now I'm going to go down this path, right? My favorite one, though, is that the Saudi king said he would buy Boeing airplanes if we provided him with the same technology that was on Air Force One. So all the top secret protective technologies that are on Air Force One, that should be one of the most close held secrets of the United States, we gave to the Saudi king because he promised to buy airplanes. So, I mean, it's like when you start looking at all those different examples and you just see the entirety of the corruption that goes through administration after administration. And that's what this exposes. That's what this tells us about.
Hey, I just thought of a couple more favorites, Danny.
Lay them on me.
All right, July 25th, 1990, April Glaspie meets with Saddam Hussein, the American ambassador. And we had only had the Iraqis version of this meeting until Manning gave it to Assange, who gave it to us. And we now have the State Department version of this meeting. I celebrate April Glaspie Day every July 25th. It's coming up again. And what she told him was, hey, it looks like you're moved your entire military to Kuwait's border there. And James Baker wanted me to emphasize to you that we're not too concerned about that.
She actually used, if I remember this correctly, she used the same phrasing that the Carter administration used in 1980 when it gave Iraq the thumbs up to invade Iran. And I forget specifically what the phrasing was, but essentially like, basically matters here, local matters here in the Middle East are not something we're going to get involved with. And that was the Carter administration's signal to Iran. Yes, please proceed with this. I'm sorry, Carter administration signal to Iraq. Please proceed with this invasion of Iran. And so that's what my recollection is that more or less she said the same thing that 10 years ago, the Iraqis have been told to justify their invasion of Iran. So, hey, go ahead and do the same thing with Kuwait. Why would they not think it that way?
Yeah. And look, I mean, she says in there, look, George Bush doesn't want a war. Well, look, everybody knew Iraq was going to take over Kuwait in a coup de main in a day, which is what happened, right? So sounded like George Bush is not going to start a war with you is what she said. And then she later told the New York Times, well, we didn't think he was going to take the whole country. The whole idea was he was supposed to take the northern oil fields and punish them for overproducing from the shared oil wells on the Rumelia oil field. And hey, look, this only led to 40 years of war and the Shiites ruling an Arab capital city for the first time in 1,000 years and 10,000 suicide bombings and the rise of the caliphate and all of this stuff ever since then comes from that. And then right in the middle of that mess, another favorite of mine, I guess it just jumps out at me there's a great little Googleable phrase there, but also the import of the whole thing is from the beginning of 2006 when Zalmay Khalilzad, the neoconservatives' pet Muslim from Afghanistan, is summoned to go and meet with the king of Saudi Arabia. And the king of Saudi Arabia says, I don't understand it. It was always us and you and Saddam Hussein against Iran. Now you have given Iraq to Iran on a golden platter. And so what are you going to do about it? And then Khalilzad, of course, bows and scrapes and says, don't worry, Your Majesty, we're going to take care of it for you, which is, of course, like chapter 1 in the movie of how Barack Obama's dirty war in Syria started. Why was America backing al-Qaeda suicide bomber head choppers in Syria? To make it up to the Saudis and the Israelis that we had done what the Israelis wanted and overthrown Saddam Hussein and ended up putting Iran's best friends from the Supreme Islamic Council in power. So if we put Iran up 2 pegs in Baghdad, we got to try to take them down a peg in Damascus. And that little key right there. And then I checked someone actually, I don't remember who, somebody who had been stationed in Saudi Arabia or had worked there, something let me know that that's right. They use the same idiom. We say silver platter. They say golden platter, the Saudi royalty over there. They live the high life.
So, yeah. Okay. So you're right. And Matt, you said this a while ago. I mean, we could literally go on for hours, plural, just getting the highlights of all of these things. But I want to get back to Assange a little bit because whereas none of these people have been held to account for these many sins that you're talking about here and gross violations of law and everything else and working against our own interests. But Julian Assange, on the other hand, they successfully really treated him like an axe murderer. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. In fact, I wonder if between the two of y'all, if y'all can kind of walk me through when he first had to go into hiding. And then, as I understand, when he was in the British control after that scene I showed a minute ago, that he was put in solitary confinement and basically treated like the worst offender that you've ever had, and just treated horrifically.
Yeah, well, he went. So it was 12 years ago. It was June of 2012 that he went into the Ecuadorian embassy. He was there for 7 years. I visited him while he was there, and it's essentially a 3-bedroom apartment. When I visited him, he had been there for 2.5 years at that point. And excuse me, my thoughts were at the time, my God, he has spent 2.5 years here. I mean, the deprivation that he was under, the harassment, the surveillance was it was clinical, it was scientific, what they were doing to him in order to drive him mad, essentially, as well as to physically beat him down. And then after 7 years of that, they pull him out. Like what happens is Ecuador has a change of government. The Americans get to the new Ecuadorian government. The Ecuadorian government allows the Brits to come in. The Brits take him to Belmarsh, which people will call the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom. And in Belmarsh for more than 5 years. This was April of 2019 that he goes to Belmarsh. So more than 5 years in Belmarsh. He is kept in a two meter, I believe it's 2 meter by 3 meter, maybe even smaller than that. So a very tiny cell, very narrow, basically a bit of space between the bed and the door, the bed, the far wall, and enough space for him to stand up. So maybe it's 1 meter by 3 meters. I forget. But anyway, it's very small. There's a replica you can see in London of what it looks like. And he is kept essentially in a solitary confinement in conditions that are reminiscent of an 18th century dungeon, because that's essentially what Belmarsh is. It is essentially a dungeon. He may have been above ground technically, but everything in there is as if you are in something out of the Count of Monte Cristo or something. I mean, so he's in those conditions. He's kept in solitary, the harassment, the abuse, again, the scientific, the clinical pressure that's put on him by the state in order to break him down. And
well, now here's what I don't understand in the British legal system. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I am, but he was not charged with anything at that point. He was waiting whatever decisions on whether he's going to be extradited or not. But under what conditions can people be treated like that and not have any chance to? I understand he also didn't have an opportunity to have lawyers come and talk to him. I think that he was just treated in the most unhumane way possible. Yep. How does he get by with that? Or how does Britain get by with that in the current world? And why did no one ever stand up for him?
Well, people did stand up, and that's a lot of what happens here. And when you talk to the Assange team, they will emphatically state that this has always been a political case, and that it's political pressure that will cause us to get Julian free. And that's essentially what has happened. And the British people, their support for Julian grows and grows because they see what is occurring. The British courts are put in this position of either continuing along with this extradition process and sending a man to a country who has stated clearly that we will not respect his rights, that he will receive no right to free speech. He will not be able to avail himself under the protections of American law. We're going to try him under American law. We're going to try him for violating American law in a kangaroo secret court, but we're not going to provide him with any of the protections available under American law. This is essentially what the British courts are faced with, right? That these clear violations of British law, these clear violations of European law, clear violations of international law. So the Brits have to make this decision. The judges in the British court have to make the decision. Do we want to humiliate ourselves and bow and kneel and be just in slavish obedience to the American empire and extradite him? Or do we release him? And that was the question that was going to be coming up basically in this appeal hearing in 2 weeks. And I think the Americans understood that we may not win this, that we have put the Brits into a position that is untenable for them. We have essentially, when they bring him to Belmarsh, they bring him on charges of bail jumping, because when Julian goes into the embassy in 2012, it's to avoid British detainment, because the Swedes were looking to extradite Julian Assange to Sweden on these trumped up, bogus, false sexual assault charges, completely fabricated nonsense. There's actually now an inquiry in the British Parliament into the Crown Prosecution Service's role in those trumped up charges. But anyway, Julian goes into the embassy because he knows that this is all just a ploy to get him into the custody of either the Brits or the Swedes. And then once he's in their custody, again, either the Brits or Swedes, he will then be extradited to the United States. And so, you know, what happens is when they take him into Belmarsh in 2019, initially they hold him on these bail jumping charges, but that quickly expires. And in fact, I'm trying to remember now, it may have been that it had already expired, that there was the limitations had expired on holding for someone for that. So anyway, they keep him locked up in Belmarsh at the request.
Can I just say here real quick that he had said he was perfectly, I don't even think he was charged in Sweden. They just wanted to question him. And he said, come here to England and question me. And they said,
that's exactly right, Scott. So the way it works internationally, and particularly both in Britain and in Sweden, is when you're questioning someone, you can do it by telephone. You can do it by having their people come to you. There was absolutely no need for him to have been extradited to Sweden to go through a questioning process.
In other words, he knew it was a pretext, right? It didn't just seem like a pretext. It
totally was a pretext.
And let me just say here real quick, because I know you'll remember your train of thought, but on the Hannibal Lecter thing, or treating him like a serial killer, they did have him, like in court, they would have him in a glass cage like they do in Russia, and they'd have him bound hand and feet with the chains between his ankle shackles and his wrists, which is seriously like the body language there. So this is severely prejudicial on the audience in the court. It makes it seem like they believe that they have real reason to be afraid that he would murder us all if he could, that this guy is extremely dangerous. He has to be bound hand and feet to even be allowed in the same courtroom with us. And they did treat him that way. And speaking of James Clapper of Operation Storm and all those other horrible sins, he is in the news today saying, well, Assange has paid his dues. In other words, they were inflicting a sentence on him this whole time. They didn't have a real legal charge against him. As Matt says, they are afraid they're going to lose this appeal. It's a bogus charge. The Espionage Act for doing journalism, they were in real danger there. But they kept him in solitary for 7 years. How do you like that, scumbag? That's their attitude, right? They punished him before his trial. And that was why they treated him that way.
And I guess, Matt, that kind of goes back to what you said earlier in the show here. They wanted his head on a pike as a warning to anyone else. This is what will happen to you if you do the same.
Yeah, I mean, they kept this man in captivity. They kept him from his family. They devastated him mentally, spiritually, physically for 12 years. All without any due process, all without time in a court. I mean, the extradition hearings in London, they were all procedural. There was no due process in any of that. There was no attempt at finding of fact. It was not a trial. It was all procedural. So for 12 years, they were able to torture him and those he loved. And they're getting away with it. And Clapper, Brennan, these people we're talking about, I'm sure if we were to turn on Fox or MSNBC or CNN or wherever these people are on television, you'll see them as the ones talking about this. I mean, so this is what. But the thing about it, though, again, is why were they doing this? Why did they feel? One, there was the security state who wanted vengeance. They wanted to make sure they had control of all information. This is damaging to the empire. So you understand the security state in all this. You understand why the corporate media goes along with it, because they're part of the establishment. They're part of the empire, and the elites lock arms and they protect one another and work together when they have to.
Oh, they hate it. That's
they hated it. Yeah, because.
The media people is like the jocks and the cheerleaders, so mad that this dork was infringing on their little terrain. And so they all forsook him and the First Amendment with him. That was how much they hated him, was if the DOJ wants to take the First Amendment to the cleaners along with Assange, they were happy to see that too. And that goes
because it's not going to, whatever they do won't apply to us, because we're going to be good boys and girls. We're going to stay within the lanes that we are, right? And in this way, we will never run afoul of this. We're never going to end up in Belmarsh because we will never do what he did. We'll never actually practice real journalism. We'll always be basically stenographers and spokespeople for the empire. But what
as opposed to like saying some of those, just the highlights you guys have both told me about a while ago, instead of following up with those and saying, hang on, that was illegal. You broke American law with this, Mr. Clapper, or, you know, any of these other guys, Mr. Petraeus, that was illegal. Where's the charges on that? What? And I mean, to absurd for me to even say out loud, but why did any of that happen? I guess to your point you just made.
Yeah, you know, and you had cases where, again, James Clapper, it's focused on him. He's in front of the U.S. Senate, and he is asked, "Are you spying on the American people?" Ron Wyden asked him this, and his response is, "No, we are not." Very clear. You can't get more. The language is so easy to understand. It's not convoluted, or this is very plain spoken language. And no, we're not. And then, of course, when that happens, when it's exposed that you are spying on the American people, the Senate does nothing. And this, of course, comes on this. Them follows, because it's happening kind of concurrently, is the Senate Intelligence Committee under Dianne Feinstein. One of the few things Oliver say nice about the lady was at least she had her people really look into how the CIA tortured people. So kind of concurrently to all this, you have the Senate investigating the CIA's torture program. And as this is happening, where the NSA, the intelligence services, are lying to the Congress about spying on the American people, you have the CIA spying on the U.S. Senate. So what occurs is the CIA hacks into and infiltrates the Senate computers, the Senate Intelligence Committee computers. And the Senate doesn't do anything about it. I mean, that should have been a constitutional crisis. That should have been something that films were made about years later, in the sense that you had the executive branch spying on the legislative branch in their most, in their most controlled spaces, and the Senate does nothing. So it's not even the fact that these people walk in there and lie to their faces. It's the fact that they do things such as spy on the directly elected men and women of the United States Congress, and there are no consequences.
Well, but you see, Matt, there that Gary threw up that headline. They apologized, so everything's fine, right? I mean, they were sorry.
On that one, what had actually happened there too on the detail was Feinstein's Senate staff investigating the CIA torture program. They were given a room at CIA headquarters to go and dig through the files as delivered to them by the CIA. And what happened was somebody either accidentally or accidentally on purpose gave them the real secret history of the CIA torture program that had been, like the Pentagon Papers. Sometimes they do an actual honest top secret one. And this one was for Panetta. And so they weren't supposed to give that to the Senate staff, but somebody did. So then Brennan falsely accused the Senate staff of stealing it and hacking into the CIA computers somehow and stealing this document, which of course is impossible. And then he actually referred them to the Department of Justice and tried to have the FBI investigate and the DOJ prosecute the staff of the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee investigating their torture regime. So this isn't even like co-equal branch. This is the CIA is the boss and the Senate ain't nothing compared to them. And so where you would think that what Brennan's job would be to say to Dianne Feinstein, yes, ma'am, whatever you say, since you're the boss and I'm not, that instead his attitude was entirely the opposite of that. That who the hell she thinks she is? She's only the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's the director of the CIA, the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, the king of the world. He can do whatever he wants.
And so the thing that's important to this in the WikiLeaks storyline is that you go back and the first big bombshell revelations that WikiLeaks puts out are the Guantanamo Bay files, if I have my timeline correct. And that's like 08, 09, they put these out. And that shows about the black sites. It shows about the rendition. It talks about the torture. And that's what is the genesis for a lot of this conversation about torture. And so when you start to look at why are they so incensed, why are they so upset about this? Well, you're giving information to people who then might do something about it. So if WikiLeaks hadn't released this information, the Guantanamo Bay files, would Feinstein and her staff ever have been doing this in the first place? But I want to get back to the media real quick, because the thing about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange that terrified the media was the fact that it's a new form. It's a new way. It's a threat to them, right? So just as we're able to do this right now, we're able to have this type of conversation, just as we can get our information through here, that subverts, that usurps the corporate media in a manner that is not just dangerous to them, but is existential to them, right? I mean, so it's not only you're taking away their spot of being the people who tell you what you know, right? Being the ones who set reality for us, who explain what the world is like to us. That's their prerogative. Not only are you taking that away from them, you're taking away their bottom line, right? And we have seen that happen. Just look at the ratings for any of the cable news networks. Look at what's happened to the newspaper industry. If it wasn't for Donald Trump, the New York Times would have gone out of business in 2015, right? I mean, so it's also this aspect of what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks created in 2006 or whenever they stood it up, that has been a very real threat to established corporate journalism in the U.S. because it attacks their profits.
Now let me shift gears just a little bit here. First of all, I want to look back at Julian Assange. Apparently, he's literally minutes away, if he hadn't already landed, and so he's in the next phase of his process here. As much as you guys are aware, what is going to happen next? What he's going to land here? He's going to apparently admit to some kind of wrongdoing, some kind of a deal that's worked out, so that he can then literally be free from that point forward. Is that how you understand it?
It's I just saw Stella Assange talk about this, Julian's wife, and they're still being pretty quiet on the details. I have seen the court documents, which were pretty thin, a letter from U.S. attorney to the judge in Saipan, which, let me just say, is perfect that this is taking place in Saipan, which I think most of us had no idea that there's a U.S. district court in Saipan. But the idea that this is happening in a far-flung province of the American empire, where this is going to be finally adjudicated on, is in this American colony, is just That's like funny. the right. It's a cherry on top for all.
It's
of
just
this.
The other side of Catalina Island, man.
I mean, I think it's like 1,400 miles from Australia. That's how far away it is.
Oh man.
But they're being pretty tight-lipped about it. There wasn't, I mean, in the court documents, that the plea deals, he pleads guilty to one count under the Espionage Act of obtaining and disclosing national security information, which, the danger in that is people are saying, well, a plea deal doesn't really set precedent. But in the minds of the American government, in the minds of the American empire, it's all the precedent they want. All the precedent they need. It keeps this open-ended, right? Because there's no court saying, no, you can't do this. And in fact,
this is a huge point that we kind of glossed over earlier, Danny, which is that the indictment against this guy is a total fraud. Right. They had to pretend that he helped Manning break into these computers and steal these secrets, which wasn't true. The only thing that they had was they had to completely twist the facts on Assange's. We think it's not even 100% clear who's on the other side of the chat machine there on WikiLeaks side, but presumably Assange was helping give him a password just to leave a false trail and sort of implicate someone else. Had nothing to do, and it didn't even work anyway. They didn't even pursue it anyway. And it had nothing to do with getting into the computer and getting the files, which Manning already had the authority to do. That was how he knew all the files were in there in the first place and worth getting. And so, they had to try to twist this and say that what Assange did was conspire to pilfer the information rather than just receive it. And so, then there is the big danger that since that's BS, that essentially they could twist those facts on any reporter from now on. Then if you're doing national security beat reporting and they want to say that you somehow worked with your source or encouraged your source or gave advice to your source about how to get more information for you, then that somehow you're now guilty of conspiracy to leak the information rather than just receiving it, which is how this was always previously understood. So there are severe implications for, in other words, the ratification for this BS indictment,
Right.
Yeah.
And there's
So,
no,
and I'm
and
going to
there's
get to
no,
that in just a second. But first, I want to stick with Assange for a minute. What, given the last whatever it is, 12 plus years that he's been, under all this emotional trauma and incarceration, et cetera. I mean, how hard is it going to be for him to, I guess, get his life back in order?
yeah, I mean, that's the question is that how, people have said, hey, in the video that we've seen of him over the last 12 hours or so, people say, hey, he looks good. And well, because he's pumped full of adrenaline right now. He's walking out of 12 years of cruel and unjust and torturous conditions. I think most people look pretty good, so that's the adrenaline. Like right there as we see him walk up there, who knows what he looked like as soon as he got into the aircraft, once he knew the video was turned off. So, how he recovers, what that process is going to be like, what's it going to be like for his family. And here's the thing, we don't know details of this plea deal. I mean, one of the things we do know is that he will receive, I think it's 62 months as part of the conviction, as part of this deal. And then that will be counted as time served because that's the amount of time he spent in Belmarsh. So as soon as the judge signs off on this, he should be able to exit the courtroom, get on a plane, and presumably go home to Australia. But we don't know what are the other aspects of this. We also know that the Australians are, the top members of the suck ass fan club of the United States. I'm not sure how to put that. And so the Australians, as much as they've been upset about this, the Australian government is certainly going to put the United States and what it wants over the needs and rights of Julian Assange. So whether or not Julian is going to be able to speak, whether or not he's going to be able to publish, what he's going to be allowed to do and say following his release, I don't know if there's anything within the agreement that's going to preclude him. I think all of us hope that as soon as he walks out of that courtroom, as soon as he gets off American territory, he starts running his mouth again. I hope to God. I hope he starts WikiLeaks 2.0 or whatever it is.
And yeah.
But we don't know what the details of the agreement are. I'll also say too, I'm a little annoyed at there's a few people out there who are saying, he should have stuck to it. This is a betrayal.
No,
he's letting us, right? I mean, people who are saying this from the comfort and luxury and safety of their sofas. The fact that this man, what Julian has gone through the last 12 years, he doesn't have to do anything else the rest of his life. He is the same as, like, say, Chelsea Manning. I mean, Ed Snowden. These people have done so much for us, for so much in terms of informing us of what our governments are doing, informing us of the assault on our rights, informing us on the assault on our humanity, that these people never did have to do anything ever again with their lives. They've done far too much already. They've given too much already. But I think, like everyone else, hopes that Julian gets right back into it. But whether or not he's able to, for health reasons, physical, mental, spiritual, or also too, whether there's any type of binding aspects of this agreement that would prevent him from doing so. I would expect the American government, if they could, they would. That's the type of people they are, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So next question is, what is the ramifications of this? Because, I mean, just listening to you guys talk, it kind of sounds to me like that the US/UK have come out on top, that they got this guy suppressed, that they have sent his, images of his head on a pike, so to speak, as a warning to everybody else. They have the media cajoled so nobody asked the hard questions. What is the future of the truth telling?
Can't stop the signal, Mal. There's nothing that you can do. I mean, the thing is, and look, speaking as a victim of Google de-ranking here, I'm still going, and so are all my guys, and all of our work that we're still doing. So, ultimately, I don't know what they can do. You can't shut down the free speech of the internet without shutting down the commerce of the internet and make the world stop turning on its axis. You can't do it. It's how everything in the world works. And so this is, when we see the Twitter files and now the Amazon files and Facebook files and the censorship, I mean, this represents panic, right? The lashing out, dying gasp of our old oppressor, right? These old institutions that are losing their authority over us. There's no reason. We have no reason to believe in them anymore. They lied to us about every single thing so many times in a row. And so, as Matt said about the New York Times, if it weren't for Trump, they'd be gone by now anyway.
Yeah.
Charlie Savage be washing dishes like he should be. And then the rest of us can go on and be happy and free without him. So, yeah, I think ultimately Julian Assange is the king of the world, right? There's and has been this whole time. There's nothing that they can really do to shut WikiLeaks down. There's always going to be a mirror. There's always going to be a torrent file on the Pirate Bay or whatever clone where you can get WikiLeaks' entire haul. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, it used to be pamphlets and faxes and videotapes, and now it's, you know, gigabits per second. So there's really nothing that they can do about it. I think your show is a perfect example of that, Danny. You've gone from nothing to I don't know how many high tens of thousands or more followers by now on this show. Just what, you don't have like a makeup guy and a bunch of production. You're just sitting there doing the work, talking about important issues, right? And not pandering to the news cycle or anything, just doing nothing but war day in and day out on all the most important stuff. And everybody can tell the value in it. So, and if it wasn't on YouTube, it'd be on Rumble or it'd be on somewhere else. And soon enough, all of this will be decentralized where you don't even have a .com to go to. It's just, you have your own app and you can watch all the Danny Davis you want, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this point that Scott's bringing up is so important. And we're the fight's only going to get harder. It's only going to get worse, but we are winning. And I'm reminded, what's the phrase? A dying mule kicks hardest. And that's how the empire is going to be. So we've not seen anything as what they're going to do, but we know we have the upper hand here. We have the momentum. So last in May, I hosted the live stream outside of the Assange appeal hearing in London. We talked about that earlier. And we were up to, just on Twitter, we were up to 150,000 live viewers on Twitter. And, wow, you know, and this was morning time in Britain. So this was, you're talking about, you know, 5 a.m. U.S. East Coast, right? I mean, so the Americans hadn't even woken up yet, and we had 150,000 viewers on Twitter. That week, primetime ratings for both CNN and MSNBC were below 100,000. CNN was like about 80,000 or something like that. So we got essentially twice as many viewers. And I know it doesn't add up. It's not, you know, equal apple to apples when you're talking about live streaming and a CNN production on cable and everything else. But essentially you can get the feel for it though, right?
Yeah. And so half of those were at the airport, stuck, right? Waiting on a flight, nowhere to go.
That's exactly right.
No choice,
you know, yeah.
No channel changer in sight.
You know, and so, you know, we understand this. We understand what our capabilities are. We understand what the capacity is out there, the desire, the want for this. We understand who is interested in this. What we have to break through, though, is that the elites get there, the way the elites control all this, right? So that 80,000 who are watching CNN, Jake Tapper or Dana Bash or whatever cretin is on there. I have other words I can use to describe them, but I'll keep it at that. Yeah. You know what I mean? But the problem is who's watching them, right? Is that it's the people who are at the banks in New York. It's the people who are at the think tanks in Washington, D.C. It's congressional staff members. It's people who are in the mayor's office in Los Angeles, right? So it's the people in power because they're all part of the establishment. They're all part of the elites. And that's the idea, is breaking that all up. But, you know, for right now, where we're heading with this type of technology, and more importantly, the spirit, the things that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks put in motion 15, 16 years ago, however long it was, you know, and it comes to, and we see that now they're going to ban TikTok. And I think you can draw a straight line between what's offensive to the empire on TikTok and what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks started in 2006. Right. I mean, so we just have to realize that we are winning, that technology is in our favor, and that we are up against something that's going to fight us so hard. And the worst is only still to come. And
I just want to point something else out too here in the last few minutes we have. Listen, it's not just that from a certain perspective. I asked the leading question a second ago: has the elites won? has the system won because they shut him up and none of these other things were held accountable. But here's the problem, because it's not like a game where you have 4 quarters and then there's the end of the game and yay, we won. It's just ongoing. When the people do the things that have been exposed, it has consequences. And so far, they haven't had horrific consequences for it yet. But if these things keep going and people don't keep exposing them when they've done wrongdoing, then the consequence to all of us at some point could be catastrophic. I mean, not the least of which, who knows if some of the things that we're doing in the Middle Eastern conflicts, in the Russia-Ukraine war, some of the lies that we're being told there on an hourly basis from the mainstream and from the administration could get us into a war that could get us killed. And a lot of people, in a worst case scenario, escalate into nuclear war. That's the cost of allowing the system to win, and to people like Scott Horton's show and Matt going on all the shows that he goes into, tell the truth, whatever may come, because people are hungry for the truth. Gary tells me this a lot, that he sees all these studies and stuff that shows people are sick of the mainstream media because they know it's BS. And fortunately, there are folks like you guys for them to go to.
Yeah, I was in the coffee shop this morning, and I heard a bunch of older men talking about different whatever they're talking about, and one of them brought up Assange, and they're all kind of like, "Good, that's good." And one of them said something about like, "What was the deal with that sexual assault thing?" And one of them said something like, "Oh, some trumped up, BS, And one of the guys says, "Yeah, what would you expect?" I mean, so I think what you have here with Assange, with the wars, with government, is this is all what people expect. People don't trust, whether it's government, they don't trust corporations because of their life experiences, because as Scott was saying earlier, they've always been lied to. They've always been lying to us.
Yeah.
Our whole lives, we're all about the same age. Our whole lives, they have lied to us.
I remember 30 years ago, the Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown's plane crashed in Bosnia or somewhere. And all the talk radio was like, wow, you think Bill Clinton murdered his own commerce secretary? And it was just the immediate reaction was, well, Bill Clinton murders people all the time. You know that everything he says is a lie. And geez, if this commerce secretary was going to get him in trouble, of course he'd kill him. Why not? And I think that's healthy. I think that's great. I think everyone, it's always been like that to me. It's like the Carlin thing from 1992. I don't believe anything the government tells me, nothing at all. And that's always at least a very good starting point, And I think more and more, people are learning. People just take that for granted. In fact, something you were saying there, Matt, reminded me of, if you go back to Orwell's 1984, the lies are all for the party members. Right? Like you can't convince the average guy that it's in America's interest to back Al-Qaeda against Hezbollah in Syria or whatever. That doesn't sound right. But in Washington, D.C., it's like almost like your ticket to the dance, right? This is what proves that you're a member of the thing, is that you're willing to believe in the crazy, untrue thing. That this is our consensus. This is what we're doing, is we're going to fight this war until Ukraine, every last inch of it, has been freed of Russian troops. And we're all saying this, and we're all pretending to believe it. And for everyone who's not willing to lie that much, you can stay on the outside of the Beltway and complain about it on your YouTube show. But if you want to be part of the game, you have to agree to the lie. It's sort of how we know that you're in the club or whatever. That's how they do it. And so that's why I think, think about how absurd it is to tell the American people that Iraq is going to attack us if we don't preemptively attack them first, or just, the insanity behind the wars in Syria, in Libya, and in Ukraine, for example, or, pretending that it's the Palestinians occupying the poor Israelis. What are they ever going to do? And all of this kind of thing. You have to, it's really, if you remember 1984, the proles, they can know the truth. They can have their little magazines. They can complain about it all they want. But it's Winston Smith and all the guys at the ministry. They're the ones who have to believe. They're the ones who have the telescreen to enforce their conformity all the time. And so then that's what we're dealing with, is like where you have this consensus that's based on a total unreality. In fact, here's one that I know you're very familiar with very recently, is Biden keeps saying, and I now believe that Biden believes that Putin has said he's coming to Poland next. He wants to recreate the whole USSR. Now, we know that, no, he did not say that either, dude. But the thing is, that's the line. And Biden has said it so many times. I think he's not lying anymore. You know, and he's the kind of guy who believes his own lies anyway about graduating at the top of his class and a drunk driver killing his wife and whatever lie he tells. He always believes his lie and repeats it. So now he's just convinced. He told Time magazine the other day, Putin made it very clear in his declaration of war. If he wins in Ukraine, he's going to conquer Poland. We have to stop him. And it's like, okay, if you sign up for that line of crap, then you can get a job at the State Department. Right? For the rest of us, we're stuck out here knowing better and watching the slow motion train wreck.
And that is the consequence. There will be a train wreck at some point. There will be an accountability at some point, because truth and reality will impose itself over the spin at some point. It's a matter of when, not if. And I guess that's what we guys like all three of us keep telling the truth to try and avoid that outcome. But anyway, that I know we could just keep going on forever here, but I just want to thank you guys for coming on today and sharing these insights and kind of giving us some of the background of what actually happened with the Assange deal. Really grateful for you guys both. And just as individuals and close friends and people I admire and respect so much. Thank you for doing what you do on a routine basis, and please do keep doing it.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
And thank you guys for joining us too. We're always grateful because we are all in this together, folks. This is why we have this channel, because the truth you got here, you're just not going to get on mainstream media. You'll be lucky if you even hear that anything named Julian Assange happened today. But now you know some truth. So be sure and spread this around, like this, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more of this where it came from. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.